Hey, hot listeners, this is episode 7 of the Husband and Wife Talks podcast. Thank you all for being here. This episode I know is released a little late in your feed. That's because me and Marta have been busy traveling and unpacking all our stuff from Maryland to Colorado. So this episode is actually going to be us talking about that whole experience. Each day going from Maryland to Ohio, Ohio to Kansas, Kansas to Colorado, along with talking about an audiobook that we listened to throughout the journey and all our experiences during this whole trip. It should be a fun one, so we really hope you enjoy the episode. Hey, Marta.
Hi, Adam.
What's shaking, bacon?
I don't know.
You don't know?
No.
Okay. Well, we're here, all hot listeners. We made it to Colorado finally. We're recording this sometime early Tuesday morning in our new Colorado apartment. Got a ratchet setup going. We still have things left to unpack, but we got most of the big stuff here packed up or unpacked and situated properly. Really enjoying this apartment, but we figured probably should record to get something out on Tuesday. So, what's up, baby?
What's up? Well, we're in Colorado unpacking, getting used to our new area, so lots of new things, changes, and it's an exciting time.
It is. It's very exciting. I guess this episode we were thinking of just going through what we did packing-wise and all that. If people are interested in hearing our whole story of moving all the way from Maryland to Colorado, a 24-hour-long drive with a car attached to a 15-foot Uhaul while also having another car driving behind. I guess we would get started on our first day of packing, just get right into it.
Yeah.
Going from Maryland to Ohio. Lucky enough, your parents, Marta, decided to help us out with the move, so we could take 2 different cars, so we weren't just in one U-Haul all the way down. We ended up taking both cars that we had to Colorado, which required us to attach one of our cars, my car specifically, to the back of the U-Haul, which I'm not used to driving something that large, especially with something attached to it as well, which was a little scary.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever driven a truck.
And you still haven't because you didn't drive the U-Haul once.
That's true, yep. But I remember the first time when you drove it from where we got it in Maryland to our apartment.
Yeah, Rockville nothing was packed in it, and I was not used to driving a gigantic, wide truck.
Terrified.
Terrified?
Yeah.
You weren't even the one driving it. I was.
Know. Which probably made you even more nervous because not only are you scared, but the person who's supposed to believe in you is sitting next to you like, I hope you don't crash. I don't know what's happening. But then by the end of the trip, I was napping in the truck.
Got comfortable with it. Yeah, I think the main tip for people who've never driven a U-Haul is never driven a truck is you don't realize how wide it is, but just take your time. Don't care if people pass you. That's basically the main tip that I have with driving a U-Haul. But I did realize throughout the drive, which I guess we'll get more into it, is when I had the auto transport with my car attached to it, it was surprisingly quote unquote easier to handle. Because I remember when I finally took off the auto transport, it felt vastly different. I don't know what it felt like you could turn more quickly, but that didn't. You had less control over it. It felt like, I don't know.
You could turn more quickly with the auto transport attached or without?
Without it,
that
but
makes sense.
It felt like I could. It wasn't a controlled turn as much. Whereas with the auto transport, you had to go slow and steady.
I see.
And it was holding you down. Whereas if you turned with all the stuff packed still in it, it felt like it was more wobbly because, you have weight distributed throughout the truck. Which, speaking of packing, our first day from Maryland to Ohio. So our plan was, your parents, I don't know why they decided to do this, or they decided to help us, which was very nice, but they went down to Florida for a cruise the week prior to our moving. And then they wanted to help us, so they flew back the day we were going from Maryland to Ohio. So that morning, we got everything. We hired movers, got everything packed into the 15-foot truck. It was pretty packed to the max. Marta never saw it, thankfully, because she would be terrified, I think, with how tightly everything was packed. It was basically like Tetris.
Well, the movers looked really worried when there was still a bunch of large furniture items left, and they were like, I don't know if this is going to fit. And I'm like, you don't know if it's going to fit? We have one truck, and we have 2 tiny 2-door cars that aren't going to fit anything larger than like one medium-sized cardboard box. So it better fit, mister. It better fit.
But they made it fit, which was really nice, tightly packed. So, of course, everything, whenever you move, there's always going to be something that gets chipped or damaged. I think that's just the name of the game, because you can't pack everything nice and neat and wrapped all the time. There's always going to be damages, especially with driving for 24 hours in a U-Haul truck with a bunch of bumps and downhill stretches. But we got everything packed on that Friday morning, basically. I was trying to rush to make sure the movers got done in time. We had a 15-foot truck, which maybe in hindsight, maybe should have got a 17-foot to make it less of a worry when we're packing up.
Well, to be fair, the 15-foot truck U-Haul advertises as being good for 1 to 2 bedroom apartments, and we had a 1 bedroom with a den, so we thought that a 15-foot truck would be plenty. But they also, like, when they advertise it, they don't know what size furniture you have, how much furniture you have, how many boxes and other things you have. So I think it's really hard to estimate if you've never moved with a truck before, because before when we moved, we had different stuff, like your stuff and my stuff, so it wasn't everything all in one apartment, and it was hard to figure out the sizing for sure.
Yeah, and we had like basically 2 bedrooms, but we had a lot of extra stuff, like a day bed, a big desk. So there's a lot of extra stuff that they don't take into account of, I think, for those truck sizes, because they don't really know what you have in your apartment. It's sort of like an estimate. I remember when we were thinking about going to a pod, it was only like a 7-foot pod, but they said, yeah, a 1 bedroom should fit in this. And then we went onto the site and put in the stuff that we theoretically would have in there. And after putting in the big, large stuff, we had 96% of it full. And we still had plenty of other boxes that needed to go into it.
Yeah, in hindsight, it's a good idea that we didn't go with the pod, because our stuff would not have fit. And also the pod, it took, a week and a half in between when they pick it up in Maryland and when they drop it off.
I think it's like a week to 10 days.
Which is, I guess, convenient in the sense that you don't have to worry about transporting it yourself, but also it was really nice that once we got here, meaning to our apartment in Colorado, we already had all of our stuff with us, so we could just start unpacking, and now a few days in, we're already making it our home rather than just waiting another week or 2 weeks to have our stuff get here and be able to unpack then.
That's the one thing that we realized when we were looking at actual movers, not pods or U-Hauls. When movers themselves would take it, they have a set amount that they can drive on a daily basis. I think it's company guidelines or...
I think it's just laws about driving how many hours you can drive per day for drivers.
I think that's what happens with truck drivers. They have to stop after a certain amount of time. I forget the exact amount, but movers, talking to them over the phone, they mentioned that for this long of a drive, it would take 2 to 3 weeks for our stuff to get here, which with the quick turnaround that we had, we would not have enough, I feel like, leeway to make it 2 to 3 weeks. So if anyone's looking to get movers, you might want to realize that or plan it out more in advance, that it could take a decent amount of time for your stuff to eventually get there, just because of constraints of how long a driver can drive on a certain day, that it may take 2 to 3 weeks for this length of a trip, which was from Maryland to Colorado was 1,900 miles, which was a long trek to drive.
I think it was actually like between 1,600 and 1,700, but the 1,900 was how many miles U-Haul gave us.
Oh, okay, so that's what I'm confusing with.
Because I guess in case you take a bit of a detour or whatever, they give you a little bit extra.
Yeah, I did not want to take a scenic route with this 24-hour drive in general.
Yeah, and people asked, a few of our friends, I guess, asked how the drive was and how it went. Definitely. So it's funny because I've always wanted to do a cross-country road trip, and my dad has joked before that, oh, we should like drive to Colorado, like just take a road trip. But we talked about it after all drove here, and we realized that not exactly. I mean, I guess there was two aspects to it not being the most ideal road trip that I pictured in my head. One of which being the scenery, because we took the most direct route possible. We drove through mostly the Great Plains, the Midwest, so there wasn't really as much to see, and it's not like we stopped in any of the cities with any tourist attractions, since we were trying to get here directly.
Yeah.
And also when you drive 3 or I guess it was 2 days, like 2 days straight and only stopping to sleep, you don't really have the time anyway. So it was both the route we took and also the timing of it that was not ideal for it being a road trip feel, I guess you could say.
Yeah, and I think taking more scenic routes or stopping would have been more conducive if we got our stuff moved there from another company and we had our own cars, like smaller cars, to just take around. Because I can't even imagine trying to take a U-Haul to go to these scenic places, and with U-Haul with a car attached to the back of it, and how wide it was. Because that's another thing you have to worry about when you have that attached. I remember looking up all the time when you're taking this road trip, you're supposed to make sure that your U-Haul is properly secured, locked, and to make sure that no one steals your stuff, parked in a sort of way where it's more difficult on them, which I think with the car added to it, it sort of made it more difficult. But we were so packed to the max that I don't think the first thing that they would have had to quote-unquote steal was a 2-part desk that was taken apart, and that sucker is pretty heavy in its own right, so all the power to them if they could steal any of our stuff, because the way that most of the time you pack, you put the heavy stuff up front, which most of the time is your quote-unquote valuables, because it's all the boxes, and they have like the little ledge to store the boxes as well, so that's all up front. So to get anything of worth or value, they would have had to crawl through all of our stuff to get there, which would have been a time sink, and would have been impressive if they were able to get to the lock and then there. But other than that, it was good. The one thing before I guess we get started on going through the days of the trip, sort of a brief summary of what happened on those days. I know another tip for anybody that's going to be taking the U-Haul with an auto transport. I remember talking with the people at U-Haul. Every time you are starting up or you stop, you have to make sure you check the joint in between the car and the U-Haul, because they mentioned that a lot of times hooligans or whoever will go up to the joint, and just to be a-holes, to be completely honest, they loosen the joint, which I can't even imagine why people would be that mean to do it. But, there are some crazy people out there. So just make sure you check all the straps and everything is tight and like when you put it onto the transport. But the transport itself was actually relatively easy. That U-Haul helped us out put on. The U-Haul people, you just drive up onto it, put straps hooked to the frame, and then the auto transport it's like a ball joint that's hooked onto it. I guess we'll get into driving a trailer at some point in the future of this podcast, but I think I'll send it over to Marta to talk about the first day.
First day?
Yeah. Since it was a fun time, especially for you. You had to go pick up your parents at the airport.
Yeah. So we planned to leave Friday, and since we knew that it was roughly 24-hour drive in total, we planned out where we would spend Friday night and Saturday night, with the goal to get here on Sunday due to the leasing office hours, just to make sure we got here before they closed. So it ended up being, I think, like a 6 or 6.5 hour drive on Friday, just drive time, not stopping for gas or to rest or bathrooms or anything like that. So based on that, we decided that somewhere in Ohio would be at about 6 to 6.5 hours, and that would be good. And 6 hours is like not a little amount, but it's also like not too much for the first day. So we thought that was a good place to stop, good amount of drive time. But there was just some issues with leaving as early as we would like, because of course when you plan everything down to the minute, like, okay, we're going to have the truck packed at this time, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to leave at this time, things always pop up that make them not ideal. So my parents' flight ended up getting delayed by I think 2 or 3 hours. And I was picking them up, and then we had traffic coming back, and it was just all these little things that delayed the start time that we didn't account for. But then once we ended up leaving, I think it was first day was probably the easiest because I think we only stopped once or twice.
I wouldn't call that easy.
Well, I was the least tired on the first day. Even though, by the time we left, it was, I don't know, 7:30.
It was pretty late.
And then we stopped to get some food because none of us had eaten for hours.
We had blueberries.
That's true.
That's
Blueberries are life if you've listened to any previous podcast. Well, I think only the last one we talked about.
So what we did, your dad started driving the Uhaul, thankfully, and he started to go ahead of us while we went and we wanted to pick up food. So we went to a place to pick up food and then got coffee and then waters to try to catch up. But your dad, driving that U-Haul, pretty quickly got pretty far away, more than I expected. So it took us like a few hours to finally catch up to hand him over the food that we already ate.
I think we stopped about, I don't know, almost an hour in, just to hand over the food, water, and then stop for a break. But I think the first day I said was the easiest was because we hadn't been driving before that, so we were all fresh and ready to go. But it was difficult because it was dark for most of the drive. I mean, we started around 7:30ish, so it gets dark around 8:30, 8:30. And also we were driving through the mountains, which made for at least some sort of scenery. So that kept the fact that the roads were a little bit more windy as we were going through like the western part of Maryland and then West Virginia, Pennsylvania. That at least forced me, since I was driving that first night, forced me to stay focused and awake, and like there was stuff to look at, whereas further on it was more flat and just not much scenery.
Well, once it started getting dark, was there really much to look at? Because it's kind of hard to see anything.
No,
really.
Not to look at, but I just mean the fact that the road was not fully 100% straight. It helped me
pay attention to everything that's going
more,
on. No, because towards the end, when it started getting really flat, we started getting a little sleepy in the car. So we had to turn on some jams, some tunes from Spotify, and I had to make sure, because as a co-pilot, I had the responsibility of keeping the main pilot awake, so she doesn't start drifting off to sleep, because that's the main goal. So had to find tunes on Spotify that Marta wouldn't skip, because she wanted to jam too, so I had to pick out jams so we could sing along and stay awake, which helped rejuvenate us for that last 2-hour portion of the drive. But towards the end, I think we were just beat. even singing along, I could see our energy started fading, and we ended up getting to... Did we get to the hotel in Columbus, Ohio, like around 2 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah, like 2:15. That was rough.
Yeah. But the benefit with being in Columbus, Ohio, or closer to a city, is that in the morning there's things around the area, which I noticed when we ended up getting to Kansas. There was barely anything in the area, so we could have gone to... we went to like Starbucks to get coffee and things of that nature to get breakfast, but the next portion of the drive was from Ohio to Kansas, which at a certain point didn't really get very scenic after a while. I mean, there was a lot of sporadic raining that was happening. I noticed that was the strange part when we were driving, is that it would just randomly rain, and then cut off, and then rain again, and then cut off, and then just rain. And even though it was very bright out, the sun was shining, but it would just rain randomly, which threw me off completely. But yeah, that second drive was the long 12 to 14 hour drive, depending on how many times. I think it was 12
hours of driving, but then we had to stop for gas, and then we would switch off between who drove the U-Haul and stuff, because it's hard to drive in general, but it's also hard to drive that big of a truck. Not that I would have any idea at all, because like Adam said, I didn't drive it. But I mean, it's not easy, so you have to stop and just rest, or else you're just gonna get sleepy, and
You also have to get out, because for me driving it, at certain points you just cramp up. My right leg specifically, because I would have to, especially in the U-Haul truck, there's no cruise control, so you would have to be going or stopping or going or hitting the brakes, so your legs you can never really stretch out your legs, so to speak, so I'd get the back of my hamstring would hurt. But the benefit of the U-Haul truck, even though it's not really the benefit for your wallet, is how long it takes for you to fuel up the truck. So I would suggest trying to find gas stations. Most of the time on large highways, you'll find gas stations where it's more of like a lineup structure, which makes it easier for
like the truck rest stops.
Yeah, kind of. Where it's easier for you to pull in a U-Haul with an auto transport, because if it was like a normal gas station, it would probably take up 2 spots, which is not what you want. But I think the U-Haul takes up 25 gallons most of the time if you're at like a quarter left.
I saw on the sheet, actually, when we returned it, it had the information of like how much gas was in it when we got it and everything, and it said the total, like from empty to full, is 40 gallons.
Ooh.
Not that we ever filled up 40 gallons, because that means we were at totally empty, which obviously your truck would just stop driving if you were empty. But 40 gallons, that's like 4 times the size of my tank and my little Honda.
So you can say the miles per gallon for a U-Haul truck is not the best.
Yeah, I mean, especially considering it was fully loaded and towing a car. So that there's a lot of weight pulling it back.
But yeah, as I was saying, the benefit of having to refuel for a while, you get a long time of just standing and walking around and waiting for your U-Haul to fuel up so you can stretch a little bit. Because that's I feel like the main thing is just getting cramped in a car or the U-Haul truck and needing to stretch and kind of getting tired of sitting, because one, sitting is not the best for you, especially for that long extended period of time. But yeah, that second day kind of was uneventful. There wasn't much that happened besides like the raining, stopping, driving for a few hours and stopping again. I feel like that took us a while just because we had to, I think the first day finally caught up to us like halfway through, where all of us were kind of tired of driving. But Marta and I made a smart decision that second day of purchasing an audiobook, which I meant to do before the drive, but highly recommend any audiobook. I think what we chose was a fiction book, because it's more likely to keep us riveted and engaged than if we chose like a nonfiction or very history-based, where it wouldn't be as, I think, quote-unquote, exciting. And I noticed with the audiobook, it was, I knew I wanted to choose it because I think the description said it was like a crime drama mixed with Pretty Little Liars. And I was like, oh, that'll keep us right
Pretty Little Liars, I'll like that.
Exactly. But, I mean, I wanted something not simple, but something very straightforward, so to speak.
There's nothing simple about Pretty Little Liars.
Oh, God.
Very complex plot.
But when something straightforward and easy, not easy, but you could follow along. And I noticed with the audiobooks, because when I read books, sometimes I get a little ahead of myself, especially fiction books. I want to see what happens in the future, so I kind of sometimes like skip lines to go to the next dialogue piece instead of getting like the surroundings or the descriptions of everything happening. Whereas in audiobooks, they read every single line, so it allowed me to, be more engaged in what was happening and allowed to picture it. But the reason I liked this book, it was One of Us is Lying. And it had 4 different perspectives throughout the book. And what I really liked is that they had 4 different voice actors speaking the parts of the person that they're, or the first person perspective of that person, which made it more interesting and intriguing, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I liked it that, you mentioned this, but the fact that it was a mystery kept us more engaged. I know, Adam, you just mentioned that we wanted something more engaging as opposed to maybe like a historical podcast or whatever.
I was trying to convince Marta in the second day that we should listen to Hardcore History.
A 4-hour history podcast.
You make it sound worse than it actually is. If anyone's ever out there listening to Hardcore History, I highly recommend that podcast, because Dan Carlin does a great job of keeping it engaging and kind of making it more of a story than an actual like listing of timelines and what happened here. He makes it more riveting and sort of makes it feel more of a story of the plot points that made it cascade to a certain crescendo of history. I'm
I
trying
don't
to
know.
sound smart here.
I was not feeling 4 hours straight of just history.
But anything that's like Pretty Little Liars, you're
Anything
100%.
with some high school teen drama. I mean, there were parts of the audiobook where I was like, I had to remind myself that these characters were in high school. And then I think about my high school experience. I'm like, I cannot relate to 95% of this. I won't get into the nitty-gritty details, but there was just some stuff.
So the main plot point of the book One of Us is Lying, which I do recommend. It was actually a pretty solid audiobook and probably a good book in general. From what I saw from the reviews, people really enjoy it. But the main plot points is that's what the mixture was. It was like the Breakfast Club mixed with Pretty Little Liars. That's what it was. But the main plot point is these 5 kids are sent to detention, and at the end of detention, someone dies, and originally thinks it's an accident, but then through the investigation, they believe somebody actually committed this murder, and it goes through everybody's individual perspective of certain things, and the main person that gets killed was someone that holds like a blog post, kind of like an app that spreads a lot of true gossip throughout the school, so not many people like this person. He spreads a lot of rumors, or not rumors, but true things that get out. So it's a lot of twists and turns throughout the plot point, and I know you didn't want me to try to guess the ending because you get a little upset if I guess it right in the beginning.
Yeah, well, I remember it was the first night when we were walking to the hotel we were staying at in Ohio, and you were like, oh, it was either at night or that morning when we were about to start our next drive, and you were like, do you want to talk about like what you think is happening or who you think did it? And I just flashed back in that moment to the first time we watched The Notebook together. And spoiler alert about The Notebook coming, so if you haven't seen it, pause it or fast forward. But the first time we watched The Notebook together, I had seen it and Adam had it, and there's more movies he's seen that I haven't than vice versa. So I was like, oh my gosh, you haven't seen The Notebook? It's a cute little rom-com, like I cry and blah, blah, blah.
Not rom-com, it's just romantic.
Okay,
story.
No comedy. Okay, just rom then. But I wanted him to watch it, so we watched it together. Here's a real spoiler alert, so close your ears if you haven't watched it. Literally, the movie starts with this old couple reading, or the old man is reading to the old woman, like a love story because she's in the hospital. I think she has some sort of memory loss, so she doesn't remember, and he's just like reading the story to her. And then it cuts to scenes of like a young couple in love and all this stuff. And then Adam's like, oh, yeah. So I bet like that old couple is the young couple in the future. And I was like, are you serious? When I watch movies, and I talked to my mom about this, and we're similar in this sense, but like when I watch something, I suspend all analytical skills, unless it's like a mystery or a criminal type show and you're supposed to kind of figure things out. But if it's any type of lighthearted or romantic or comedy, and there's any sort of plot, which most movies have a plot, I don't think about anything. I just kind of take it for what it is. I watch it. I relax. And Adam is the complete opposite. It is actually hilarious. When you watch something, or when we watch something together, you're always trying to like analyze what's going on and what's going to happen. So when you already knew 5 minutes in, when they show the old couple and then they show Noah and Allie as young kids, and you already knew that's what it was.
That's what happened with the Frozen movie. Spoiler with Frozen, when I guessed the main
the bad guy,
yeah.
the villain.
And I was like, they don't show a love story right at the beginning. That's not how Disney works.
So anyway, back to what we were talking about. That's when you mentioned, oh, do you want to talk about like who you think
like,
did
no!
it? I was like, no, because A, he probably has analyzed it more than I have, and I'm just like, oh, these 4 kids are telling their story. Like, I have no idea who did it, and we'll find out in 9 hours at the end of the pod, or at the end of the audiobook, or whenever it was finished. So I just like flat out denied that conversation. I was like, nope, you're not going to tell me, because you're probably going to be like, yeah, I think it was this person, and then this, and then because of this. And I'm like, and then that's what ends up happening, and then the whole book is ruined.
There were some plot points where I didn't guess what was going to happen. But the main thing that happens at the end of this book, I kind of had a feeling that it was going to be that way.
Oh.
But not. There was additional points to it, which I couldn't guess. It was just sort of, once the plot point was revealed later on in the book, I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. So.
I remember one of the main, we don't want to spoil this book because it's
relatively new, I believe.
It's came out May 29th, 2017, so a little over a year ago. But I remember there was one plot point that was revealed, or something revealed about one of the characters, and you're like, oh yeah, I saw that coming. I was like, what? I did not,
yeah.
I did not see that coming at all. You're like, oh yeah, I mean, earlier this happened, and then they said this, and like, I just watch things and totally suspend belief, or disbelief, whatever the phrase is, but it was cool because back to the whole audiobook thing, I don't think I've listened to a fiction book on audio. Mm-hmm. It's usually like nonfiction or to learn something, just because, I don't know, I don't read as much fiction anymore, which is bad because I feel like fiction just lets you
escape
and not have to worry about like learning something specific, which nonfiction books usually you are learning from them. But yeah, I think audiobooks definitely would recommend in the future, and I feel like
for long trips anyway.
For long trips, because for road trips or even being in the car for a while, that's a good way to like stay engaged and not get bored. Because I remember in college I had an internship, or actually 2 summers I had internships that each drive was like between an hour and 15 minutes. So I was spending upwards of 2.5 hours in the car every day, and I started listening to podcasts, but eventually getting into like the same routine, because some podcasts like they have the same intro and then they cover the same exact type of content. So
not here at the HAWT
not
podcast.
At the HAWT pod, that's right. What if someone's like, well, yeah, I'm not going to listen to podcasts anymore because Marta just said that they're repetitive. Nope, not what I'm saying here, folks. Not what I'm saying.
Keep listening, please.
But my point was that when I drove so far every day for those summers, I got, I don't know, a little tired of podcasts because it would be like the same kind of stuff. But back then, I didn't even think about audiobooks. But if I had known, I probably would have given it a try because it's definitely, I don't know, it's nice.
I think podcasts are good for like a commute to work, like you're saying, because they're more short, condensed versions. But if you're doing a long road trip, audiobooks are really nice because you don't have to try to keep flipping to new podcasts each time. If you don't have a lot of them downloaded to listen to throughout like a 24-hour drive, you'd have to download like 24 episodes of the TED Radio Hour if you wanted that.
24 episodes of HAWT Pod.
Of course, yeah. But you know what I mean. You have to download a lot of episodes and sort of have to be in the mood to listen to the same podcast type for that 24 hours, and flipping through different podcasts. Sometimes I'm not in the mood for a certain podcast, so I have to flip to a different one, and then it's sort of you have to make sure you have all the different types that you would think that you want, whereas at least in the audiobook, it has a set amount of time that's a longer period of time, because some audiobooks could take 18 hours or sometimes 20, depending on how long the book was. This book was, I think, a shorter book.
It's around 10.
It was like 10 and a half hours to get through the whole audio portion of it. But that was just nice because we knew that we had that allotted amount of time where we don't have to worry about trying to keep ourselves entertained for this long drive. It'll keep us engaged and awake. Whereas if we didn't have that, we'd try to be like listening to music or trying to find podcasts or talking, or not that talking's bad or anything.
Talking. Can't talk to your spouse for 24 hours.
I mean, after a while, it does get, I'm not saying talking to you gets tiring, but it's just, you can run out of things as Marta gives me a death stare. But I feel like at certain points, for me personally, some days I'm just not talkative as much as other days, where I just don't feel like I have the energy to talk for a long period of time, where some days I can blab on for a long period of time. I think it just depends on the mood that you're in. So I think audiobooks are a good way to keep engaged throughout a long road trip. So recommend audible.com. I think that's the app that we used to get this audiobook.
And also, I mean, it's not Prime Day anymore, but I remember on Prime Day they were having like a special, I think it was like $4.95 a month for 3 months. Mm-hmm. I forget what you get with that, but It's definitely a good way. And they also have the 30-day free trial. I remember doing that free trial a few months ago, and I ended up listening to a few audiobooks, and I was like, this is a good, I don't know, good purchase, good free trial.
Mm-hmm.
But I was thinking back to our drive, and notable and not so notable things, or just things I noticed. But I remember when we were driving in Ohio, I've never seen so many cities or names of cities that I recognized from other states or even other countries as I did in Ohio. Like, I remember seeing Baltimore. I was like, what? I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. Why is there Baltimore, Ohio? And then there was like the city of London. I think Paris wasn't in Ohio. I think the Paris was in like Missouri or Indiana or whatever. But in Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, there were so many cities that were like copied from other places, and it was just really funny because, I don't know, they were pretty significant. There were a couple pretty significant names. Like I think Newark was one of them. Baltimore. We saw Portland.
Triadelphia,
which is kind of like a Philadelphia, but not quite. Trying to think of more.
I'm trying to think that maybe they were trying to play off of the fact that it was Philadelphia and then the tri-state area as well, so they combined it together so they didn't look like they're completely copying the name.
Maybe.
And there were some, I forget I feel like it was a Greece, not Athens, but maybe Vienna?
No, Athens.
Wasn't Vienna one
There
of
was
them?
Athens and there was South Vienna.
Oh, and then they had like West, what was it? It was like a longer name. But it just seemed like they were just adding like West or South in front of it, so they didn't look like they were completely stealing the names. But I remember you mentioning on the car drive how you saw like something funny, or what was it? The guy stated that like, oh yeah, my girlfriend wants to take like a long Europe trip to visit all these main cities in Europe. So he put together like a Google Map road trip of hitting all like London, Ohio, Paris, Illinois, or whatever it is, and all the main cities that you would see in Europe, but in the United States.
And it's in that like Ohio, Indiana region, so it was really funny. I remember seeing that on Facebook. And then when we were driving through, I realized that those were actually real cities, and they were pretty close to each other because I remember we passed all of them on our drive in that those section of states, but that was really funny.
And then to the final day from Kansas to Colorado. I mean, I don't know if there's really much of note on that 14-hour drive, just because it was...
Well, 14 was the second day.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, of note to add on before we go on to day 3. I feel like that was the main thing. We started listening to an audiobook, and there was roads. We saw cities that were being stolen, the names, and that's about it, from what I can remember. And then the last day of driving from Kansas to Colorado was pretty flat, so to speak, because we had to get through all of Kansas, and I was driving the Uhaul truck for most of that day. The main thing to watch out in Kansas is it gets a little windy sometimes, so your Uhaul truck can get a little gets blown a certain way, so you have to hold on to the wheel semi-tight. But that was the thing that I noticed with the auto transport, is that it helped keep the U-Haul to the ground because there was a lot of weight in the back. So if you got blown, the auto transport, because it's hooked on a ball joint, doesn't really go one-to-one with wherever you're moving. It takes a little bit to lag to follow you. So even if you get blown and move this way, your transport is still sort of there holding in like the center lane, so it's easier to get back. Whereas if you just had a straight U-Haul, you get blown out, you sort of, I feel like it could have had more of an effect. And the bumps could have had more of an effect as well, because you go over a bump, you have the heavy car holding you down, so you're not bumping up really high, which I noticed when dropping off the auto transport and driving to actually our apartment to get unpacked and everything. You felt every bump a lot more than on the drive, which was kind of funny. But yeah, Kansas was uneventful to say the least. Sorry, Kansas. But
I felt kind of bad because there were a lot of, on I-70 when we were driving through Kansas, there were a lot of exits where they have like those big signs. They usually say like gas, food, and they had the signs, but they were blank. And then when you would drive by other exits, they would say like just no services, which I guess means they just don't have any food or gas or anything. But some of the exits where we did get off to get gas or like stop for the restroom. There were buildings, but there were a lot that looked like they were abandoned businesses or just went out of business, which was sad because like back, I don't know, 50-ish years ago, maybe more, maybe less, but when less people were moving to big cities, I'm sure those businesses were once, hopping. I mean, they wouldn't have a building there if there wasn't a business there previously or someone living there. So it's kind of sad to drive through, and it was just so empty and
but you
also
can get cheap houses there. We looked.
That's true. I forget if it was in Kansas or Missouri or
I think it was Kansas. You were looking on
like
at
20.
some point.
I saw a house, a single family home for $20,000. I was like in Maryland or in Colorado near any big metropolitan city or area, you cannot get anything for $20,000. You can't. You probably can't even get a studio unless it's, I don't even know, several hours from the city.
That sounds nice and all, but the fact that you have to, I feel like to find those prices, you have to be in like the middle of Kansas, far away from any of the cities, because I think we were like in the middle of it when you found that. And the nearest airport was either, what was it, probably Denver or Kansas City?
There was one town that's probably kind of between Kansas City, Missouri, which is on the border of Kansas, which I learned all about.
Which was strange, because there's Kansas City, Missouri, then there's Kansas City, Kansas, and then there's northern Kansas City, Missouri.
Yeah.
That was strange.
And I didn't know this before we drove through. I knew there was a Kansas City in both states, but I didn't realize that there's a river that goes between Missouri and Kansas that separates, maybe it's not a river, just kidding. There is a river, but the river is not what separates the cities, it looks like, from Google Maps. But anyway.
Always prepared here on the Hot Pod.
That's right. But anyway, so there's like, if you look at the map, there's Kansas City, and then if you zoom in, you see that there's a smaller Kansas City in Kansas, but it's still, if you zoom out, it looks like it's within the Kansas City, Missouri metropolitan area, but it's just the fact that the Kansas state border looks like it just goes through Kansas City, Missouri, and then Kansas realized that they also need to continue the city, so it's just part. So I'm wondering how that whole thing happened. It's interesting. And I forget. Oh, but my point was that when we were driving and we saw those really, really cheap houses, I think I realized the closest airport was called Hayes Regional Airport, so it wasn't an international airport, but these houses were like 2 hours from that tiny airport.
We stopped in Hayes, though, I think. That was the second stop.
No, we were going to stop in Hayes, but we realized that would have been, it was an hour and 45 minutes further
from where we stopped, and we were already
exhausted where we did stop in Kansas, so we were all thankful that we didn't choose to drive almost 2 further hours on that second day.
Yeah, and on that third day, Martha got some good nap time in the
Honestly,
U-Haul truck.
I went 180 on that U-Haul. The first day, I was like, I'm going to be terrified. I'm never driving in a U-Haul again. Like when we picked it up and we were driving around our area in Maryland. And then by the third day, I was like in and out of napping in that truck. Like we'd be mid-conversation and I'd just fall asleep. Because I think the bumps, too, they weren't they weren't very harsh bumps, but they were like very slow,
soothing,
soft, and soothing. So I would just.
You're like a baby being rocked in the baby
honestly,
chair.
That's what it felt like.
Yeah, I think driving U-Haul is actually not that bad when you're doing cross country trips, just because you're gonna be driving straight shot. Because driving on 70, in my opinion, was relatively easy with the U-Haul because you're just going straight. But it gets more difficult when you finally get to the city that you need to be at. So when we finally got to Denver, Colorado, we got to I-25 where the lanes opened up to 7 lanes, and I had to like move into each. Had to move over, get over lanes, but I have to realize, I can't move over even just if my truck's clear because I have this car on the back and I don't want to smash it into another car because that's a little terrifying to do. So. But I did realize, and especially when you're in the city, when you hit your blinker on for the U-Haul, a lot of people like to get out of your way just because, I guess that's like the same thing with an 18-wheeler. If you see it has a blinker on, you're not trying to zoom past it because that can do a lot more damage to you than you could do to it.
Although I feel like when an 18-wheeler has their blinker on, people are less willing to move. I don't know if it's because it's a bigger truck or the person's more experienced driving.
Maybe.
But like a lot of people just try to squeeze between and like cut the truck off. But I feel like it's a different culture for U-Hauls, and I feel like it might be because the person doesn't know how to drive.
They feel your pain. They're like, oh, I feel so bad that you have to drive this, so I'm gonna let you in. Because if you drove by somebody in a U-Haul, you'll see them just because the way they're probably not used to driving it. They have two hands clutched on the wheel, white knuckling it, holding it tight, just because they don't want it to get tip over somehow. Yeah. But that was basically day 3. Is just driving through Kansas. Nothing too eventful in Kansas except for we saw some cars coming back from a demolition derby, which was kind of cool. They're all smashed up. I don't know if you saw that. There was 4 different cars, which is kind of cool. I guess that's the fun thing to do there, which I've been to a demolition derby. They're actually fun to watch. And like dirt track racing, my dad took me one year when I was younger. It was a fun time.
The only experience I have with demolition derby is watching it on TV on last season of The Bachelor.
Oh, God. I was like, what? You watched Demolition Derby, and then I saw the look in your eye. You're about to say something.
There was
I was
a
like,
date
oh, no.
on Ari's season where it was like a bunch of the girls left, but they went on Demolition Derby.
I think we should just record us watching it, because they'll just hear me make fun of everybody on the show. Well, that's basically what we do. That's how we get entertainment.
Yeah.
Make stupid
at least
jokes
the first
about it.
3 quarters of the season, and then the last quarter when there's like people are actually saying I love you and like really brokenhearted. That's when I kind of feel bad making fun of anything, because people are actually getting their hearts broken, and when there's only a few people left, you like picture your future with that person, but obviously only one person will end up with the lead. So
horrible concept.
Yeah.
But everybody watches
the beginning is very entertaining, but then when it gets to be way more serious, it's heart-wrenching to watch. I don't know.
Yeah, agreed. But yeah, that third day, we got here around 2:30 in the afternoon, started unpacking. Of course, Denver decided to give us a nice treat and start raining while we're unpacking stuff, so that was fun.
Literally while we're carrying stuff from the truck.
But it didn't last too long. But we have most of the main stuff unpacked in here. The main thing with unpacking, I realized, is it takes a long time when you finally get to the tiny miscellaneous stuff, because you have no clue where you put it in your other apartment, just because you probably just put it somewhere to just get it out of the way. But yeah, I think the main thing we have to do is just get that stuff, which after this podcast, we're probably going to get back to unpacking, which, woo, fun times.
Yeah, I remember when we were packing, though, in our old apartment, I was, like, thinking, oh, is it worse? Is packing worse or is unpacking worse? And, of course, everyone has their own opinion, but in my opinion, packing is way worse because, especially towards the end, like, in the beginning, it's easier because you're like, oh, all my clothes go in this box. All my dishes go in this box. But then when you have a bunch of miscellaneous items, like electrical cords and random miscellaneous kitchen stuff or stuff in the desk and just things that didn't originally fit perfectly in boxes early on, and you just kind of have to throw them together. That's the stuff that's the worst to pack, because then you know you're not going to remember where you put it. And then when you get to your destination, you're like, oh, I need my blah, 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 and you can't find it. But unpacking is nice because everything you're putting away and decluttering, whereas packing is the exact opposite. I mean, you are putting it away into boxes, but having boxes all over your apartment or house is so cluttering. Yeah. Well, I mean, all the main furniture pieces are set, which is nice. But it's all those other boxes with so many random things that you don't even realize you have until you start unpacking. You're like, I forgot I had 3 or 4. I think I've seen 4 HDMI cords so far.
I just realized that I accidentally had the mute button on for that one section that I just mentioned about being unpacked. So there's going to be a nice long gap of me talking, but no one's going to hear it. Oops.
Editing. That's what editing is for.
Yeah, I'll just probably trim it out. But yeah, they'll hear this and be confused because there's not going to be a long gap. We're quality here at the Hot Podcast, let me tell you. Why are you shaking your head, babe?
I don't know. It's just such an us thing to happen.
Yeah, but, I mean, it's only episode 7 of the podcast. Any final things you want to state before we wrap this bad boy up?
Yes, there is.
Which is?
Super random. but from our apartment, we can see a bunch of people walking their dogs. And it's cute.
Always got to mention a dog at some point.
And it reminds me when we came to look at apartments a few weeks back, one of the leasing office agents said that in Colorado, everyone has a Subaru and a dog, which I don't really get it. I guess the dog thing is because people are outdoorsy and like you can have more time to spend time with your dog outside while doing your outdoor activities that you like. But the Subaru I don't get because it's not like Subarus are known to be.
They're like off-roading type stuff, so if they want to go
But so
hiking
are other
and stuff.
cars. I just saw a Kia commercial yesterday where the Kia was literally like driving on not mountains. It was like, I don't know. It was extreme off-roading, and they were like, the only modification to this vehicle is like all-terrain tires. I'm like, why would I ever be driving in Utah in this weird like mountain rocky type thing? It wasn't on a road at all. It was like somewhere where I probably wouldn't even go hiking. So why not everyone in Colorado has a Kia and a dog? Or like a Dodge and a dog. That has a nice ring to it.
You're gonna just start listing all the off-roading
Come to Colorado.
vehicles?
Come to Denver. Denver, Dodge, dog.
There you go. Dodge out there if you want to sponsor us. We just gave you a great slogan for your next car. Except for I haven't seen any Dodges lately. There's like the Dodge truck, but I don't think do they have SUVs?
I don't know.
Not main ones that I see.
For someone who is about to be a spokesperson, I don't know much about that.
About to be a spokesperson. You're going to be a spokesperson for Dodge and then Southwest.
Southwest. Oh yeah, that one time where I was getting on the. What was I raving about?
I think you mentioned this on the previous podcast, but you were like mentioning how I don't know, you don't have to wait for Southwest. They're always so quick or something like that. And somebody in front of you, like, you should be a spokesperson for Southwest.
I would love to.
Yeah, we take Southwest all the time. So Southwest, if you're listening, sponsor us. Give us money, please. All right.
On that note,
we're going to wrap it up. Please, if you're interested in emailing us, you can email us at hotpod@gmail.com. If you want to submit anything for us to talk about on the podcast, that'd be very grateful. Or very great. We'd be grateful. Yeah, you know what I mean. Quality stuff here. Follow us on Twitter at hotpod, facebook.com/hotpod. Patreon.com/hotpodcast if you want to support us monetarily for some reason. If you want to support us that way, which would be nice. It'd always be nice. And website, hotpod.podbean.com. You can find us everywhere on iTunes. If you're on iTunes right now, go to your library feed, click on our podcast, scroll all the way down, hit that 5-star. It's relatively easy. It doesn't take much of your time. So if you're listening to us and you haven't done that yet, why haven't you? And please do it now. Maybe write us a review. That would also be nice. You can find us on Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, all over the place. So keep on listening. Babe, say bye.
bye.
Bye, y'all.